What's up folks, welcome back to another episode of Miss Times Classics channel. In this episode I'm back in Athens, this time just taking a look at the Athenian Parthenon, where I'll look at its history, its decoration and its architecture. I'll also check out the famous Chryselephantine statue inside it as well. Let's get straight into it. So the Parthenon is a temple that's dedicated to the Athenians' patron deity Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war. The temple itself is located in a whole sanctuary dedicated to the goddess, on top of a tall flat rock known as the Acropolis, which gets its name from the Greek akro, meaning high, and polis, meaning city, so essentially it's the high city. So the Parthenon was built between 447 and 438 BC by the architects Ictinus and Callicrates, and it's built on the site of an earlier temple which the Persians had destroyed in their sack of Athens between 480 and 479 BC during the second Persian invasions of mainland Greece. So the temple is a pretty typical layout. It has this front porchway over at this end known as a pronaos, and then it has this central room here that would house the Chryselephantine statue of Athena, and that's known as the naos, and then this back porchway over here which has a room inside it, and this was known as the Opsithedomos. The Opsithedomos would store money that was initially dedicated to something called the Delian League, and this was a confederacy of Greek city-states all allied in the defence of the Greek world from another Persian invasion. However, Athens quickly comes to dominate this league and essentially turns it into its own empire, and it moves the treasury from Delos over here to Athens. Now in 447 BC, under the leadership of Athens' leading general and statesman Pericles, the Athenians used the league's funds to start work on the rebuilding of this sanctuary after it had stood in ruins as a testament to their sacrifice during the invasions. Pericles spares no expense during this building program, and he justifies the expense citing their sacrifice of Athens during the Persian invasions and the fact that they were honouring the goddess Athena. I mean, who's going to argue against such piety, right? However, the expense was perceived as extravagance and only inflamed growing hostilities with the rest of the Peloponnese. And then subsequently the Peloponnesian War then ensues in 431 BC. Now, like most Greek temples, the entrance is actually on the eastern side. So when we enter the Acropolis, as we have done here, we're actually looking at the back of the temple, the western side. Now, the reason for an eastern entrance on Greek temples is twofold. One, it lets the light from the rising sun in, but two, there's also an association with entering the underworld from the west. Now for the Parthenon, this also has an added sense of suspense and drama, as when you walk around the temple, you've got that anticipation of waiting to see the front, the grand entrance. It also gives you a chance to take in all the impressive artwork that's adorning the temple on your way around it. Now we're on the eastern side here, facing the main entrance to the temple, and we can see that it's absolutely massive, this temple. It dominates the entire Acropolis sanctuary. It stands about 70 metres long, and it was 30 metres wide. Unlike most of the other temples that we see in the Greek world, which are hexastyle, which means it has 6 columns at the front, this is an octastyle temple with 8 columns at the front and 8 at the back. It's also what we call a peripateral temple, as it has columns on all 4 sides. In this case, it's got 17 columns running down each of the sides. Now there's a huge amount of architectural tricks and embellishments that's going on with this temple that's known as optical refinements, and this really puts the Parthenon into a whole new sphere of architecture. For example, there's no straight line on the temple. Instead, the platform that it sits on actually curves upwards, while the columns bulge and then taper. The effect of this is that it's more pleasing to the eye, and unlike the straight lines that seem to bend or sag when viewed from a distance, creating these subtle bends and curves actually corrects this. Another example is that all the columns bend slightly inwards. If you were to extend the length of the columns 1.5 miles upwards, they would reach a point, and the inward slant creates a more cohesive visual unity, ensuring that the columns look perfectly aligned when viewed from ground level, and it gives the structure a feeling of upwards energy. Now there's far more going on than just this, so I've included a link to an excellent documentary you can watch that explains it far better than I can. Now like a lot of the temples I've shown you so far, the Parthenon belongs to the Doric Order, but it does have some Ionic features that we'll look at later. Doric Order means that these columns have flat tops, not like the Ionic scrolls or the Corinthian flowers that we see on other temples. It also has these sculpted square slabs, which are known as metopes, and they're broken up by these dividers, which are called triglyphs. Now, there's 92 of these metopes that go across all 4 sides of the Parthenon. Each metope was about 1.25 metres high and 1.2 metres wide, so they're a fairly big canvas. and each side depicts a famous story from Greek mythology. In the game, we just see the labours of Heracles, but in reality, the northern side would show the Greeks fighting the Trojans, so the Trojan War. The south side, over here, would show the Lapiths fighting against the Centaurs. The east side shows the gods fighting against the giants, and the west side shows the Greeks versus the Amazons. Now, these are very popular scenes in artwork found on Greek temples, and the overriding theme here is one of Greek civilization versus foreign savage barbarianism. But on the Parthenon, this has an added dimension of highlighting the Athenian participation in the Persian invasions and insinuating their power ahead of the Peloponnesian War. Now, on this side, I'm hanging off the south side here, we have some of the best surviving metopes. There were 52 metopes that survive in total, and on this south side, we see the scenes of the Centromachy. The Centromachy is a story from mythology where the Lapiths from Thessaly invite the Centaurs to a wedding of King Pirithous and Hippodamia. The Centaurs, being uncultured and never having had wine before, get drunk and they try and make off with the bride. Now, the sculpture of these metopes varies massively in quality, but I'll show you a few of the surviving now. So this first one is Metope 26, which unfortunately isn't very good. The Centaur over on the right hand side seems to have no neck, and the Lapith on the left has a raised leg that's actually too short for his body. If he was to extend that down, he'd fall over. And the drapery that he's wearing just stops at his waist and actually had to be painted in to reach his shoulders. Compare that to Metope 27, which is considered one of the best metopes on the Parthenon. This is a very dramatic scene as both figures pull away from each other but also overlap. This creates an X shape in the metope, and we call this chiastic composition. Notice how the drapery of the Lapith creates a backdrop behind the figures, which makes a more dramatic sort of scene. And finally, we have Metope 28, which really hammers home that sense of civilization versus barbarism. We have the Centaur sort of rearing up over this defeated Lapith, and the animal skin hanging off his arm. Now, another key area of temple sculpture are the pediments, and they're these triangular sections above the metopes. Now, I'm on the eastern side here, hanging above the entrance. And the story that would be depicted in this space would be the birth of Athena, but the game likes to fill these spaces with just general scenes from mythology. And the story goes that Athena was born from Zeus's head fully formed. Apparently Zeus ate Athena's mother Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, while she was still pregnant with Athena. And he did this as he feared that his children would rise up against him, similarly to how Zeus rose up against Kronos and the other Titans. It didn't work, however, as Zeus has a headache one day, and Hephaestus, the god of metalworking, splits him over the head, and Athena springs out fully formed, and so she has a sort of virgin birth. Now from this, Athena gets the epithet Parthenos, which means virgin, so virgin goddess, and that is where the temple, the Parthenon, gets its name. Now the pediment as we see it now is very fragmentary, but we know it would have shown Athena and Zeus and Hephaestus all in the middle. And this replica is showing exactly that. What we do have that remains is the news of Athena's birth, sweeping down to the corners of the pediment. And we can see how the figures closest to the ends are depicted lying down to get around the awkward closing in angle of the pediment. And this is very different to early Greek temples, such as the pediment on the Temple of Artemis at Corfu, that has no unity of size. So instead what we do is we just make these really tiny figures appear in the corners, and then we have the really big figures in the centre. My favourite detail of this pediment are the horses in the corners. We have the horses of the sun god Helios on the left side that are eager and raring to go to pull the sun across the sky, while the horses on this side, on the right hand side, would be the horses of the moon goddess Selene that are tired after their night's work, and we can see that they've got these bulging eyes and their tongue hanging out. So I'm now over on the western side of the temple looking at the back pediment, and on this pediment we'd see a different scene from Athena's life, the patronage contest of Athens. This is where Athena and Poseidon compete to be the patron deity of the city. Poseidon offers a salt spring, whilst Athena offers an olive tree, and the Athenians go with Athena as they deem her gift more useful. To the left of the Parthenon, we have the Erechtheion temple, and outside it is this small grove, and you can see over here there's an olive tree, and so this would be the gift that she allegedly offers. So it's no coincidence that this scene is depicted on this side. As you stand down here, you see the myth depicted on the temple, and as you turn your head, you see where it supposedly took place. So the pediment is even more fragmentary than it is on the eastern side. Athena and Poseidon are in the middle, seemingly about to come to blows, so a more violent interpretation of the myth. Whilst again the news spreads down to the corners. The messenger god Iris is depicted particularly well with her flowing drapery, and the river god Ilissos is depicted appropriately lying down to fill the space. Now if we enter the colonnade of the temple, we'll notice that we have this scene depicted up on the wall. The game just paints this in, but in reality this would have been a sculpted band going across all four sides of the temple, and it would have been way higher up as well, so much so that you might have missed it had you not known it was here. This is called the Frieze, and it depicted the procession of the great all-Athenian festival known as the Parthenon. A sculpted frieze like this is actually an Ionic feature, which is why we say the Parthenon is a Doric temple, but with some Ionic features. The scene would start here, in the southwest corner, and split, heading down both sides, before culminating above the entrance and the pronaos. We see many attendees, such as horse riders, priests, charioteers, water carriers, and government officials. The high point of the procession would be depicted right above the entrance, with the unfolding of a saffron-coloured robe called a peplos. This would be used to dress the statue inside the temple. The unveiling of the peplos is shown here, and it's looked on by seated gods, and they would be the same height as the standing mortals, which sort of further emphasises their divinity. And finally, when we enter the temple, we're met with this statue of Athena Parthenos. It was a colossal statue that stood at about 12 metres tall, and it's made of gold and ivory, hence the term Chryselephantine. In front of the statue would be a pool of olive oil, and it would sort of shimmer with the gold of the statue, giving it a sort of majestic and godlike sort of image. The statue depicts Athena, stood in her armour. She's got this breastplate on, with the Gorgon head, which is known as the Aegis. She's wearing her helmet, and in her right hand, she's there depicted with Nike, the goddess of victory. Now the sculptor of this statue was Phidias, and he oversaw all of the decoration on the Parthenon that I've spoken about in this video. But Phidias got into some trouble after completing his work, where he was accused of embezzling funds that were meant for the Parthenon project. So later he moved to Olympia, where he then worked on the Chryselephantine statue of Zeus, which became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Like the statue of Zeus, the statue of Athena has not survived, and that's possibly down to the turbulent history of the Parthenon, which saw it converted into a church in the 6th century AD, and then later a mosque in 1458. And then in 1687, when the Venetian Republic attempted to capture Athens from the Ottomans, the Parthenon was partially blown up, as the Ottomans had been using the Parthenons as a munitions dump. Perhaps on that bombshell I should end this video. So thank you so much for watching. Please do consider dropping a like and subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next one.